Hey, y'all. We're now just 8 days away from Florida's season opener in Salt Lake City against the Utah Utes on August 31st. So, as a result, it's finally time that I quit playing, quit messing around, quit lollygagging on it, and join the fun of prediction season. I've held off long enough. I can't hide in the dark any longer. Got to spread my wings and let myself fly. But I'm not just going to give you a record prediction without any explanation for why I choose it. Nah. We're going to get into the thick of it here on CARROLL'S Cadence. That's right, thick with 2 C's, y'all. 2. So record prediction with my reasoning behind the choice, SEC standings, and my pick to be the 2023 league winner coming today. Here we go. Welcome to another edition of the show. I'm your host, Brandon Carroll. Take this time to like and subscribe to the channel. We're just 11 subs away from 500 that I've garnered since I started this show less than a month ago. So join the fam, help push us over that edge. And while we're at it, take a second to leave your record prediction for the Gators in 2023 down below in the comments. Do it right now. Okay, great. Listen, I appreciate you. Yeah, you right there. I appreciate you. Anyways, if you've been along for the ride since our inception of this show, you already have a pretty good idea of where I stand on this Florida team in 2023. But I haven't outright said it. I haven't outright sat here and said, yeah, this is what they're going to be. This is the record they're going to hold come December when the season is over and they're, either playing for a bowl game or not, or preparing for a bowl game, I should say. But that's what I'm doing today. That's exactly what we're doing. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and let's get into it. I think this is a better Florida squad than the one they fielded in years past, especially just the last 2 years. Just because of, for starters, I think this is going to be a team that plays much cleaner than what we saw in 2021 and 2022, because that was some poor football. That was some undisciplined, unstructured football in certain areas, especially in 2021. And I think that was a larger problem created under the rule of Dan Mullen. And it was a major factor in his significant rapid decline in Gainesville. In 2021, UF ranked 119th out of 130 qualified programs in college football in penalties per game, with 7.8 violations per contest. That stench lingered into Billy Napier's first season with the Gators in 2022, because stepping into a drastic rebuild that he had to kind of shoulder, he said, all right, I'm going to implement my process, implement my plan to being able to move forward with this team. But doing so, we're going to have to work through some growing pains. And that's exactly what Florida realized in 2022, because those 7.8 violations in 2021 can't be fixed overnight. They weren't something that could be fixed that quickly. This is a year-over-year change, not a day-over-day change, which is really what Napier had to work with last season. So, like I said, the stench lingered into his first campaign. Florida drew 89 total penalties a season ago in 13 games. Good for 6.8 penalties per game. So there was some improvement there from last season, but it was still an off-penalized team that showed signs of still being undisciplined. But heading into 2023, I think that changes. I think that part of the team is not going to be as prominent as it has been in years past. And obviously, that's a positive. The operation will be notably smoother because of it as they move into year 2 of Napier's process, with several returning pieces at key spots and just leaders on this team. I think that you're going to see a drastic change in how Florida operates, just how the offense is able to have pieces in set, in the correct positions pre-snap, defense not making silly mistakes. And, obviously you look to Kingsley Eguakun, who's struggled as, with snap infractions and things like that. You look at him and say, all right, he's going into year 3 as a full-time starter. It's time for him to make that jump to where those things are no longer an issue. Those pre-snap issues are gone. And that's what Florida's looking to do this year. I think it comes in a big way. And I think that aids Florida moving forward. And then you also have defensively a much improved defense in my opinion, for the Gators in this upcoming season, because now you have Austin Armstrong, who's going to operate a system that, while largely similar to Patrick Toney's a season ago, it fits the pieces that Florida has defensively. It fits the guys that the defense fits the guys rather than the guys having to fit the defense. And I think last year As I said in a few shows ago, probably one of my earlier shows actually, there are some square pegs being tried to plug into some round holes with Patrick Toney in charge. And this year, I think we're going to see no more of that. No more square pegs and round holes. It's going to be round pegs and round holes, as a heavy dose of press man coverage really benefits the secondary that Florida has. And obviously, you're going to be able to kind of let the first two kind of levels of the defense in the defensive line and the linebackers play a bit more freely in pressuring quarterbacks, because that's going to be an emphasis for this team in 2023. There's also been some upgraded, depth on this unit. Obviously, there's some spots that have downgraded at the top, but I think Florida did a really good job in the 2023 recruiting class, and then addressing a lot of needs via the portal, even though there's been some ups and downs regarding Billy Napier's usage of the portal in general. I think overall this team is deeper than it was a season ago. This team has the depth it wants to use and wants to rotate. The defensive line specifically is a unit that really took a step forward in that talent acquisition process, and in being able to get those pieces into the program. You look at it and you say, yeah, that's a unit that went from being significantly undermanned with very little to no rotation available at its disposal in 2022 to now being one of the deepest units on the team, one of the oft talked about units on the team, and one of the units that can really push Florida in the right direction in this upcoming campaign. Because if you watch SEC football, if you have kind of just paid attention to college football in general, you know that in the Southeast, games are won in the trenches. Championships are won in the trenches. And while Florida's not a championship contender, they have the trenches available at their disposal to push them to be able to win some games in 2023 that they wouldn't have regularly won. And then all of that is just to say, in a vacuum, Florida should be better than they were over the past 2 seasons operationally. And using that, or usually, that would directly correlate into a win-loss record improvement. But with Florida being 6-7 last year, I'm not going to necessarily sit here and tell you that everything is right in the world of Florida football and the Gators are back, because they're not. They're actually far from it. They're far from being back. And there are some negatives that deter me from labeling Florida as even a team on the rise this upcoming season, because like I've said, I've been critical, but also I've expressed my optimism for quarterback Graham Mertz heading into this season, but I do think he's still a major question mark. Which Graham Mertz are they going to get? Are they going to be able to kind of make him a consistent piece? Is he going to be able to not turn the ball over? Those are questions going into this season. I think he's going to be better than what he was at Wisconsin while operating as a starter at the University of Florida, because I think the offense at the University of Florida better tailors to what he's able to bring to the table. But at the same time, how much better will he be? He doesn't have to be a world beater, but he does have to be better than what he was at Wisconsin, because while he might not be winning the Gators games, while he might not be asked to win the Gators games, can he avoid losing them? Can he take care of the football? Can he just simply make the plays necessary to give the Gators a chance, whether that be make a pass downfield? And I'd be lying to you if I was able to answer any of those with yes right now. Not saying I don't think he can do it, but it's, can he? Will he? Is more of the direction that, there's a lot of unknown there, especially the last one in terms of just being able to push the ball downfield when it's necessary, because it will be necessary at points this season. And then on top of it, this schedule is one of the toughest ones that they've had in a while. And the 2024 one's going to make this one look like a piece of cake, but it's not. It is still a very daunting schedule for Florida to have. It is. It's a tough schedule for Florida to play in a season that they really didn't need a tough schedule this year, because they're already going to have their struggles. But it's here. And right now, based on what I've seen, I will go ahead and chalk up games like McNeese State, Charlotte, Vanderbilt, Missouri, even though the Tigers have had their, successes against Florida, giving them fits. And I do think Sam Horn is starting by the time Florida plays in Columbia. I'll chalk those up as wins. And then I'm going to deem games like Georgia, LSU, and Florida State as anticipated losses, because at least in the preseason, those are 3 teams contending for a national title. Not just conference titles, national titles. But then you have really 5 games that are going to decide Florida's season, with 3 SEC East opponents that will even further dictate how Florida's success goes this year. In Utah in week 1, Tennessee in week 3, Kentucky in week 5, South Carolina in week 7, and then Arkansas on November 4th, week 9 or 10, I think. But just having those games, having those opponents against Florida, it is a tough year for the Gators with having so many toss-ups. Because I said it a few episodes ago, those 3 SEC East games against Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina in weeks 3, 5, and 7, that determines whether Florida goes 5-7, 9-3, or really anything in between that. I think 9-3 is their cap. I think that's the highest they can go this year, their ceiling. But I can't knowingly sit here and give you an honest portrayal of how those 5 games will go. So I won't. I'm not going to sit here and go game by game and kind of break it down like that because I don't know what Florida is going to look like when Arkansas comes to town late in the season. I don't know what Arkansas is going to look like when they come into Florida because right now, if I was to pick, I'd pick Arkansas. I think KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders in that backfield is going to be big for Sam Pittman's unit this season, which is going to give Florida fits. But I can't tell you that that's, whether I can't tell you Florida's running attack or rushing defense isn't going to be vastly improved from last year and make KJ Jefferson have to air it out. I can't tell you that. So I'm not someone that's going to sit here and just blindly throw out post, this late season projections, late season kind of takes at this point. I'll give it to you when it comes. Week of, absolutely. But it's not coming before then. So I'll leave you with this. All right. Let me get adjusted here. I'll leave you with this. I've factored in a lot of these things together, and I've been doing it for several weeks. It's why I've taken so long to really get to the point where I wanted to get my preseason projections for this Florida team, just because I like to evaluate. I like to be meticulous about how I go about things. I'm not just going to get on here and give you blind analysis because that's not who I am. And so as a result, just being able to evaluate this team in fall camp with my insider intel, and then also just seeing what's carried over from last season, I keep falling in between 7-5 and 8-4 for this Florida team in 2023. And after spending that significant amount of time mulling it over, I think that Florida ends up going 7-5 this season. I think I'm going to officially submit 7-5 as my record prediction, although I do think that 8-4 is a legitimate possibility. But I have a hard time seeing them beating 2 of those teams that I named in Utah, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Arkansas, especially since 3 of those 5 games are on the road for Florida this season. Because Florida's not a college football playoff contender. They're not an SEC contender. They're not even an SEC East contender this year. I've said it once. I will continue saying it if I need to. But instead, while being a middle-of-the-pack team that will endure its fair share of growing pains, its highs and its lulls, its peaks and its troughs, they're going to be simultaneously a threat to upset some teams this season, and they're just going to put themselves in a position to contend, put themselves in a position to play close with a lot of teams that they face off against this season. It's a year that is kind of setting up for the future. But at the same time, I think they have enough talent, most of which young, which means there's going to be a drastic progression from week 1 to week 12 come the end of the season and how Florida's performing, what rate at which they're executing, and how they're producing to do we're preparing for the future, but we're having success in the meantime to reclaim a above 500 record in 2023. And in the end, the season won't be flashy. They'll have to churn out a lot of their wins. There's going to be a lot of games that are going to be 1-score games that Florida barely pulls out when they do get to that 7-win threshold that I've set for them. But I do think they're going to be going in a step in the right direction for a rebuilding program, especially one in the SEC where it's hard to win 7 games in any season. But obviously at the University of Florida, it's not 7 games. That's the expectation, or even you're not going to get applauded for that. But it is the current scenario in which Florida's at. So they're going to show some signs of life in 2023. They'll exceed some of the lower external expectations that have been set. 6-6 and 5-7 are really 2 records that have kind of grown to be the most popular when we're trying to predict what Florida will bring this season. And I think that they'll put themselves in a position to exceed those. And heading into the last week of the season against Florida State, I think they have the opportunity to produce an 8-win season. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not even saying that, it'll necessarily be close against the Seminoles, who are expected to be like I said, playoff contender. But if we've learned anything from this UF FSU rivalry over the years, it doesn't matter which team is on top, which team is the favorite, what the two teams even look like throughout the rest of the season. It's always going to be a battle. I think just having the ability to put themselves in a position to produce an 8th win against a Florida State, against a team of that caliber, is exactly where Florida wants to be at this season. And their progression to be able to eventually win a game like that and eventually get back to the status that they once were in the late 2000s under Urban Meyer. So that's the where they want to be. That's where they want to go. And this, just having that ability in the final week of the season to potentially earn an 8th win, is exactly where Florida wants to be. There were points last season where Florida had 6 wins going into the second to last game against Vanderbilt. They obviously squandered that one away and then ended up losing to Florida State to go 6-6. They had the potential to be an 8-win team, or at least be a 7-win team if they beat Vanderbilt, but they lost those 2 games. I think this year they're going to go into the last 2 weeks of the season having the ability to do something very similar, but there's a potential for the roles to switch and Florida get that 7th win against Missouri and then potentially knock off FSU at the end of the season, even though right now I wouldn't say that that's a likelihood or should be expected. But like I said, Florida FSU, Florida State, Sunshine State rivalry, always a battle. It will always be a battle. And speaking of battles, what about the battle for the SEC? How will that shake out? Well, let me talk to you. The SEC this season, and this is more of just a league overview because I'm going to set up some standings that I'm going to give for the season, kind of so you can see where I slate Florida in the grand scheme of things, the bigger picture, rather than just narrowing in on the Gators themselves. So the SEC is especially interesting this year. It's always interesting. It means more in the SEC, but the major reason that I think that the SEC is even more intriguing this year is the turnover that we saw at the quarterback position this offseason. Because nearly everywhere you turn, there's a new face. There's a new piece at the quarterback spot for a lot of teams this year. Reigning national champion, lost the guy that led them to 2 straight in Stetson Bennett. Alabama, lost first overall pick Bryce Young. Tennessee, lost Hendon Hooker, who led one of their most explosive offenses in team history last year. Florida, lost Anthony Richardson. Kentucky, Will Levis. Auburn has a new starter. Vandy moved on. There's a lot of pieces that are now no longer intact in the SEC from the quarterback position. There's a select few. There's a lot of guys that, are still occupying spots as the top guy on their teams. But a lot of guys that we grew to know last season are gone. And so the league as a whole is drastically different. And while I think there's a strong possibility that the results turn out close to what is expected already this season because of the growing lack of parity in college football, the magnitude of the unknown this year, especially at that top spot in the SEC, is so interesting. It's so interesting. And because you look at the West, like just taking a glance at the West division, there's so many different question marks because Alabama, who's been a perennial division champ over there for the last decade plus, there's a good chance they revert back to what they were at peak Alabama, where they were just ground and pound, stifling defense, churning out victories by imposing their will on opponents. Dallas Turner said at SEC Media Days they want to play joyless murder ball on defense. Yeah, that's his real quote, by the way. And that's terrifying coming from a Nick Saban coach team. Because if it holds true, they are going to be insufferable when you're playing against them, when you're lined up against the Crimson Tide. Insufferable. But because they have uncertainty at quarterback, there's question marks. They'll always be good. they're always going to be that team that is in the running for an SEC West title, under Nick Saban at least. But the question mark at the most important position on the field, whether it's Jalen Milroe or Dylan Lonergan or Eli Holstein or even Tyler Buckner, who transferred there from Notre Dame this offseason. There's a lot of pieces there, but none of them has seemingly emerged, and it still seems like all four are pretty much in deadlock for this position. And if you have more than one quarterback, you don't have any. You don't have one quarterback. This isn't the 2006 Florida Gators. You don't have a Chris Leak and Tim Tebow because that's not the style in which teams operate anymore. So you look at this team, and if those question marks for a legitimate replacement become unanswered going into the season, that swings the door wide open for another team to take that SEC West throne. LSU, of which being the one, in my opinion, that is slated into that top spot immediately if Alabama is not able to figure it out at Signal Caller. Because this LSU team can contend with Jaden Daniels returning to an uber-talented roster of playmakers, as always, at his disposal. And then you flip to the other side of the ball, and they have Harold Perkins, who arguably going to be one of the best players in college football this year, if not the best, for the upcoming season. And then you have Arkansas, who's going to be a contender, not necessarily a contender, but a problem in the SEC West with KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders operating offensively. That's a dynamic backfield. Ole Miss, who completely retooled its team, it revamped its roster, and we all know that, people have mixed feelings about Lane Kiffin, but he can scheme it up. He can put some points on the board, baby. It is some fun football to watch when it's ticking, when it's moving. And Ole Miss, as a result, could be with, Jackson Dart, if he's able to take a step forward. That's another team that could potentially give Bama or the other teams that I named in the SEC West a run at points throughout the year. And then there's the East. The East, there's not as many questions because of a widespread loss of quarterbacks, a widespread loss of talent from last year. It's still run by Georgia. And I'm at the point now where I don't think anything's going to change my mind on it being the Dogs until the Dogs give me a reason not to think that they're going to win the SEC East each year. Because unless another team emerges as a challenger, as a legitimate challenger, and shows me that they can take down Georgia, there's nothing that's going to make me change my mind that Georgia is that team. Because it's a hodgepodge of, I don't really know what this team's going to look like. Are we sure that they're going to be good? I think there's a lot of questions there. Obviously, we know the questions about Florida and Mertz. Obviously, they're working through that rebuild. They're using that transition quarterback, and so that will show in their performance in 2023. Obviously, there's the questions of, is Carson Beck the answer at Georgia? Which, even if he's not, I still don't think it's really going to matter because Georgia's defense is incredible, and the pieces they have around him offensively and blocking for him up front are probably going to be, out of the 11 starters, there's probably going to be like 8 All-Americans on that team, 7 All-Americans. Obviously, exaggeration, but it's a testament to how good Georgia's been recruiting and developing under Kirby Smart since 2016. Then you go to Tennessee. Can Joe Milton sustain Tennessee's offense? Because that defense is very much still a liability. Can he put it together to give Tennessee a chance? Can Devin Leary elevate Kentucky's offense in life after Will Levis, which I'll get to that in a second? Is Spencer Rattler good? Is he good at football? He's been such an enigma in college football for quite some time because we all saw him coming out of high school because of QB1 on Netflix. He was great. He was a great prospect, but his attitude sucked, and he's had so many ups and downs since he got to the collegiate level. He struggled at Oklahoma, obviously got his spot taken by Caleb Williams, got to South Carolina, and this is his time to make a move in the right direction, to kind of turn this thing around. New scenery, new environment, time to make something shake. Early in the season, he wasn't making really a lot shake. He wasn't making anything shake. Florida held that South Carolina offense scoreless in the Swamp. Yeah, the Florida defense of last year, one of the worst in program history, held South Carolina scoreless. in the Swamp. 38-6 was the final score of that game. Is Spencer Rattler good? And I can't believe we're still asking that question because he's had so many opportunities. But it's still a question to be answered because he turned it on late last season and presented a lot of evidence to show, okay, maybe he can be good. Maybe he can be a legitimate starting quarterback for a South Carolina. He balled out against Tennessee to ruin any chance they had at going to the playoffs. He balled out against Clemson to do the same thing to them. And now you're looking at a team that, after clicking late last season, brings back arguably the best wide receiver in the SEC, not named Malik Neighbors or Evan Stewart, in Juice Wells to help him produce. That relative unpredictability that we're getting right now is what makes college football great. Because we don't know. People can tell you they know, but they don't know. I don't know. But if I had to try to put my finger on it, if I had to try to say, all right, this is how it's going to shake out, the SEC East would look like this. Georgia at 1, because it's Georgia. Kentucky at 2. I know. Hear me out. Kentucky's always physical. They play to their brand of football. They're overbearing. And I think they actually upgraded at the quarterback position relative to what they had with Will Levis last season. I think Devin Leary, if healthy, obviously, can make this offense multidimensional, and it's not just a pure rushing attack. And I know Will Levis had his moment, and he was trait-wise really good. That's why he got drafted in the second round by the Tennessee Titans. But he did not produce for them when they needed him, and as a result, Kentucky still floated around that 3 range, that 4 range in the SEC East over the past few seasons with him at the helm. Devin Leary, if healthy, can take them to that next step, can jump them over some of the other teams competing in this conference, in this division this year. Because, like I said, Tennessee, question marks. South Carolina, is Spencer Rattler good? Speaking of South Carolina, number 3, the Gamecocks. I think Rattler is still going to have some shakiness. There's going to be a little bit of pitter-pattering early in the year. But I do think that this Rattler and this team is ready to take a step forward into being a top 3 team in the SEC East. And it's going to show rather quickly, but maybe a few weeks down the line for the Gamecocks. Florida is my 4th team. I think Florida is going to be able to be in that 7-5, 8-4 range and slide into that 4th spot. And then it's going to go Tennessee, because I'm not necessarily sold on what Joe Milton is going to bring to the table. Sure, he can throw the ball 80 yards. He has a cannon for a right arm. He can do it with ease. But that hasn't stopped him from getting benched twice in his career, once of which at Tennessee. Why is it any different now? Why do we look at Joe Milton and say, okay, he's had the time to develop? Sure. But when Hendon Hooker took over his spot in 2021, that offense immediately jumped to being what that offense was under Josh Heupel at UCF. It was explosive, dynamic, stretched the field, but it also did the little things right. It also he was able to pick apart the short and intermediate to allow that deep passing game to really come alive when it needed to. What makes us sit back and say Joe Milton's going to be able to do that? I understand the hype around him because, like Anthony Richardson last year, the traits surrounding this guy, at least from a passing perspective, from an arm strength perspective, they're elite. He's not the athlete that Anthony Richardson was, so he's not going to go 4th in the draft. But I understand why people awe at him. What I don't understand is why people think that that's ultimately going to result in better production from what we saw just 2 years ago. What we saw before he got benched 1 game before Tennessee had to come to the Swamp and play against Florida in 2021. Why is that changing? I don't know. And that's why I have them slotted at that 5th spot, because while they might be good elsewhere, while they might have the weapons outside, they might have a really good running back in Jabari Small, I don't trust that Milton is going to be able to make a lot of the plays that people are saying he's going to be able to make. Sure, he's going to be able to launch some and they're going to look beautiful. But is he going to have the accuracy to do it at a rate that results directly in success? I don't think so. That's why they're slotted at 4th. Then you get Missouri at 6th. and Vanderbilt at 7th in the SEC East. And then you flip over to the West. And I know if you listened to my breakdown of how this division, how this conference is just so uncertain, you kind of can tell where I'm going to go with this. I think at number 1 and number 2 is going to be a neck and neck race all season long. It's just going to be jockeying for position, and then they're eventually going to clash in LSU and Alabama. When that clash happens, I think that LSU asserts themselves just above the Crimson Tide as the team to beat in the SEC West with a victory in Tuscaloosa this year. I do. I think that the presence of Jaden Daniels makes all the difference in this 2-team race because one team has a undenied quarterback 1. So barring injury, Jaden Daniels is the guy for the Tigers. Alabama, on the other hand, is deciding between 4 dudes. And while they have some dogs on both sides of the football, it's going to be such a tough game for them to be able to kind of elevate themselves to. So they're going to be able to win most games, but this is one where I think that they're going to be very closely matched, and it ultimately will boil down to the quarterback play. And I think Jaden Daniels gives LSU that edge to put LSU at 1, Alabama at 2. And then at 3, I have Arkansas. If you haven't been able to tell, I'm very high on KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders. I've been high on them for the past few years, but I think this is finally the year where they prove me right. Ole Miss at 4, Auburn at 5, Texas A&M at 6, and Mississippi State at 7. Auburn at 5 is going to just year 1, and Hugh Freeze is going to witness some bumps, but I think they surge towards the end of the year. A&M, this is a team that, while they are slotted at 6, I think they could either be really good up there with the LSUs and Alabamas because of that talent that they have on this team. But I think ultimately the decline of Jimbo Fisher as their head coach continues, and it reaches a head this year, and they just crap the bed. They just completely fall apart, and despite all the talent this group has, end up 6th in the West. And then Mississippi State, life after Mike Leach, will be tough sledding with, and it's not necessarily an indictment on this team. I just think that getting away from what Mike Leach did at Hail State is going to be something that's difficult for them and ultimately results in a troubling year for the Bulldogs. And before we move on, I just want to say rest in peace to the Pirate, because it's crazy to think that he's no longer with us. One of my favorite coaches to watch just because of how obviously he's a character. He was just fun to sit there and listen to, but his offense was so creative. And as someone who loves offense, it was hard not to turn on Mike Leach whenever I saw him on the guide flipping through channels during football season. So ultimately, in this SEC, I think Georgia comes out on top again. And like I said earlier, I've reached show me it's not true to make me believe it's not true territory because of how just utterly dominant this Georgia team has been on the field, on the trail. Anywhere where that red and black G is showing, red, black, and white G is showing, appearing, Georgia has been dominant, and I don't think that changes much this year. I think Carson Beck's able to get in a rhythm as the season goes on, especially having to play the powerhouses of Ball State and UT Martin and UAB in the first 3 or 4 weeks in the 2023 season. But we'll see how this season shakes out for all these teams, but obviously for Florida. Florida, like I said, 7-5 record prediction. I think Florida is going to be in a position to elevate themselves for the future in this upcoming campaign. And with that, another episode of Carroll's Cadence is in the books. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And let me get this out real quick. If you haven't subscribed, what are we doing? What are we doing? Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, fresh Florida Gators content. Come on, let's join the train. Hop on. It's moving quickly. We got to get on. Come on. I can't think of a better way to start, get over the hump, and finish your week than with my beautiful face on your phone, tablet, desktop, TV screen, car display, frickin' toaster oven, refrigerator door, you name it. I could probably get up there. If you want me to. I can figure it out. Come and talk to me. We can figure something out. But I'm sure you can pop me up there. That's all I wanted to say. Anyways, have a great week. let's finish strong and get to week 0 this upcoming weekend, because college football Saturday is only days away. It's here, baby. It's here. Anyways, for Carroll's Cadence, I'm Brandon Carroll. Deuces.